Hey guys, hope everybody's having a good day, good night, whenever you're watching this. I normally don't do videos like this on my channel, but honestly I thought this was a necessary video subject to touch up on because, this is something that really affected me, because at the time when this situation happened, I wasn't living too far from where it all happened. I lived in the Portage area, and a lot of the stuff that happened in Kalamazoo. A little bit of it happened like in the Texas Corners area, you know, which is a suburb of Kalamazoo somewhat. And you know, I'll try not to lose it while making this video, but I can't promise anything. So yeah, but um I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this, especially if you live in Kalamazoo or Portage or have before, you guys probably remember the shooting that happened in Kalamazoo on February 20th, 2016, which tomorrow will be the 10-year mark of that. I tell you what, man, it was definitely a crazy situation to remember. There's a lot from that situation that I still think about to this day. While I didn't lose any loved ones in this tragedy, I have met a few people that have, and I'll kind of get to that. But first and foremost, to those who aren't aware of this situation, like I said, there was a mass shooting that happened in Kalamazoo on Saturday night of February 20th, 2016. 6 people lost their life and 2 others were injured. At first they thought that there were 7 people that lost their life, but one of them ended up waking up as they were about to do some testing or something like that on her. It was a 14-year-old kid that ended up being alive. She is okay as far as I know. I will have the names of all the victims in the description, because I don't remember everybody's name at the top of my head. I remember a few of them, but I'm bad at remembering names. That's just the type of person I am, unfortunately. But yeah, there was a 14-year-old girl that they thought ended up dying, but she actually ended up being okay. I guess they said she was in a coma or something like that, and she ended up waking up in the hospital. Which is, I'm glad that she was able to pull out of it and that she ended up being okay. She struggled with a lot of things after that. There really wasn't a whole lot that she could do after that, but she ended up pulling through it, and as far as I know, I think she's doing alright. I haven't heard too much about her the past few years. Another person that ended up surviving, was a woman. I think they said this was at an apartment complex on the other side of Kalamazoo. She ended up getting shot quite a bit. Thankfully, she survived. I know they were saying that, she suffered a lot of injuries, and, it was definitely a miracle that she survived too. She was definitely traumatized, rightfully so. And I remember watching a video where she was at court, and the shooter was just, I'm just going to say this right now, and I apologize for any foul language I use, but the shooter was just being a complete dumbass. Like, that's what I gotta say about the shooter, when he was there in court. But, yeah, you know, the woman, I believe Tiana Crothers was her name, if I remember correctly. She was in court trying to speak, and, she spoke for a little bit, and then the shooter started talking, and, she ended up losing it, and she tried to speak a little more, and then the frickin' shooter just... I don't remember everything that happened, but he started talking more, and I guess he ended up doing something, and, Tiana ended up... she ended up losing it, and I think the... what is it called? I'm trying to think. I think the judge ended up cutting the conversation. I'm just going to put it that way. But, yeah. Abigail Kopf, that was, now that my memory's finally catching back up, she was a 14-year-old girl that ended up surviving. So, yeah. Now that name finally caught back up to me. I'm trying to speak without sounding like I'm speaking gibberish, guys. I apologize. But, real quick before I get into any more information, So, at the time when this happened, I was super sick. I was sick with pneumonia. I think earlier that day I was at the doctor's because, I was super sick and I wasn't getting better. I had already been sick for a week. And, I don't think I went to school much that week except for maybe that Monday. I was a junior in high school at the time when it happened. And, so, I was at home not really doing much because I was sick. And, I remembered watching the news that night, and, I remembered hearing about the shooting that happened at the first spot. The apartment complex or something like that. I remembered hearing about that and hearing that, there was a woman there that was injured, and, didn't really think much of it because unfortunately there have been other situations like that have happened in the Kalamazoo area. Because unfortunately, Kalamazoo's just got some crazy people that live there. So, not really thinking much of it, I just kind of went on about my night, because I was still sick at the time, I ended up heading to bed early. I was starting to get better because thankfully I was prescribed medicine and an inhaler because of my pneumonia, and I was having some issues breathing, so I was on that for probably a month or two. But, yeah, the next morning I woke up, I woke up super early because I just couldn't sleep anymore. I sit down in the living room. My mom comes out about 5 minutes later. We were going to originally watch a movie, and then, we turned the TV on, and we see something from News Channel 3 that there was a mass shooting that had happened. They were talking that a bunch of people were killed and a few others were injured, and I think that's all they talked about that morning. And they were talking about how quite a few areas were shut down because they were trying to, there was a bunch of crime scenes that were going on. There was a big crime scene that happened at Cracker Barrel. There was a Cracker Barrel there at the time. I think that closed down, a few years later, if I remember correctly. And then the other locations was I believe, a Nissan dealership, and then the spot where that first shooting had happened. I remembered hearing about that apartment complex shooting, and just thinking in my head, man, the person that did that ended up causing the other two tragedies. Like, what the hell? So I'm just sitting there trying to think, trying to process what had happened, because, I'm sitting there thinking in my head, am I still sleeping? Am I still dreaming? Like, because, prior to that, I had been dealing with a bunch of fever dreams, so of course, my thinking wasn't really rational at the time, because usually when I'm sick, my memory isn't the best, so, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Well, nope. It was something that had actually happened. There was a shooting that started with one person, and then it happened at a dealership on the other side of Kalamazoo, and then the last situation happened at the Cracker Barrel there just outside of Kalamazoo, which is pretty freaking messed up, The two people that were shot at the Nissan dealership there in Kalamazoo, I believe they were from Matawan, Portage area, and those two ended up losing their life. One of the people that was killed there was a high school senior at Matawan High School. His name was Tyler Smith. The other guy that was killed there, that was his father. I can't think of his name at the top of my head. But, the dude that, the high school senior that lost his life, I know a few people that knew him, and I'll kind of get into that here shortly, but, yeah, police were responding to, the situation that happened there, and, they had the area shut down, and, police were going around, they had the area surrounded, they had cops walking around, they were interviewing witnesses, and while they were there, that's when they got a call about another shooting that had happened just a few miles down the road at that Cracker Barrel there at the Kalamazoo, Texas Corners area. And that's where 4 more people lost their life. Originally they thought it was 5, but like I said, the little girl that was there ended up surviving, thankfully. But, it's still sad that people there lost their life, though, But, yeah, I just remembered hearing about that on the news. It was a pretty big thing that was talked about on the news endlessly for quite a while. That's for sure. I know that there's been quite a few news stations here in Michigan that have been talking about it in the past few days, because like I said, tomorrow will be the 10-year mark of that shooting, so yeah. But like I said, I was a junior in high school at the time. I went to Portage Central High School, but there was a few people that I went to school with that did know that high school senior that was in Matawan that was killed. And then there was this pizza place that I worked at, not too long after I graduated high school. I worked there for probably about a year and a half at most. And there was a few people there that I worked with that were close to that Tyler Smith that was shot at that dealership. So, I remember them telling me about how devastated they were and, how they still think about the dude. And they were pretty torn up about him getting killed in a tragedy like that. And, I definitely felt for them. Situations like that, you never know how hard they hit you until it actually happens. Even though I didn't know any of the people that were killed or hurt in that tragedy, it was something that definitely hit me pretty hard, because it happened in my, not too far from where I lived, and just hearing something about that happening in my area just really tore me apart. It's bad enough, I was sick at the time when it happened, and then just hearing all that unfold, it was not a good moment, that's for sure. And like I said, I still think about those people to this day. I still think about that tragedy. It's not something I would ever wish to happen to anybody, regardless of how I feel about those people. Regardless of what they do, what type of people they are, anything like that. All those people that were killed and the 2 others that were hurt, they didn't deserve that. There's people online that were freaking speculating, and they were sitting there like, oh, well, did this guy know, did that shooter know these people? Did that shooter do this? Did that shooter do that? Blah, 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 blah. And for the shooter, I hate to even say his name, because every time I think about that dude and, think of his name, I just, as much as I don't like to get angry, because, it's just something that I don't like doing. It just, thinking of that dude and thinking of his name and thinking of what he did just gets me freaking heated, But yeah, Jason Dalton was the name of the shooter. From what I understand, he was an Uber driver, and I guess he was mad about a few things that happened. And from what I heard, I don't know if this is just him being in some sort of screwed up fantasy, or just if the dude was just weird or was on something. I don't know. I feel like there's quite a bit more to this story than what he said, but supposedly there was some sort of demon or whatever that popped up on his phone telling him to do this or do that. Whether or not any of that is true, I honestly have no idea. I mean, I hear a lot of weird stories about people that witness, supposedly they witness things like that, and it just makes them think weird or whatever. It's like, bro, even if something like that were to happen, like, what? I mean, if something like that were to happen to me, I still would not freaking cause a situation like that. Because I tell you what, man, killing or hurting people like that, it's screwed up, man. Regardless of what his excuses are for doing it, it does not make it okay for what he did. It's not something I will ever condone, you know. Yes, there are some bad people out there that probably, maybe they shouldn't be alive, you know. But if you're going around just killing random people, like, come on, man. Seriously. Regardless of what the dude's excuses were for doing this, I mean, the way I see it is I think he was just screwed up in his head and he chose to do this at random. Kill random people, hurt a few. Regardless of his reasoning, you know, this should have never happened. Whether or not this could have been prevented, I don't know. That's beyond me. You know, maybe he could have, you know, talked to someone or done something before he did this, but I don't know. But like I said, I mean, the dude had no prior trouble, no prior arrests prior to the situation from what news medias are talking about. So, I don't know. I mean, things just happen. You know, that's unfortunately that is a part of life, and you know, these are situations that I would never wish to happen. That's for sure. From what I understand, the dude has been charged with quite a few life sentences, so I definitely don't see him getting out of prison anytime soon. Well, yeah. When the judges were throwing the book at him, it definitely wasn't pretty. That's for sure. And I tell you what, man, you know, I don't like to jump on this subject, but if Michigan allowed the death penalty, I think that that's what that dude would deserve. But unfortunately, Michigan does not have that, so, you know. So I guess there he sits in prison. That's for sure. But, yeah. Like I said, this was a situation that I still think of to this day, you know. And, you know, my heart definitely still aches for those that were affected. You know, this was a tragedy that should have never happened, you know. Sorry, that was my phone going off. But, man, this video is probably not going to turn out the best, and I apologize. But, anyways, I'm not going to keep going off subject. Yeah, you know, people were just out and about, minding their own business, living their life, doing what they wanted to do, and then just this psychopath took it upon himself to go around and hurt and kill people, which is truly screwed up. You know, one woman was just out minding her own business, and then all of a sudden, just the guy took it upon himself to shoot her and then drive to a dealership and shoot a man and his son who were just out looking at vehicles, looking at trucks or whatever. Ended up killing them too. And then drove to Cracker Barrel and ended up shooting more people and killing quite a few. Like, who in their right mind frickin' does that? Tell you what, if anybody does that, it's definitely not a right mind. That's for sure. But unfortunately, there is that saying that goes, you can't change what's done. Unfortunately, that's a saying with this situation. And, no matter what you say or what you do, it's definitely not going to change what happened. That's for sure. I remember watching this one video, though. I've been trying to look for this video, and I don't know if it's still up, or if it got taken down, or if it got hidden, or whatever. But it was a video that was uploaded. I think it was by Wood TV 8, which is a news station based out of Grand Rapids. But they were interviewing somebody who was one of his Uber riders, because I guess right after the shooting, the dude that caused the shooting, I guess he was still out, doing Uber driving, and he picked up this couple, and, the guy that was fetching a ride, he noticed something weird about the shooter. He was acting weird, and, he was like, "Hey, you're not the shooter, are you?" And, Jason was like, "No, I'm not." And the guy was like, "Are you sure?" And, the dude was just speaking gibberish, and he was like, "No, I'm just tired." And like I said, I wish I could find that interview, but, just think. If that dude would have kept doing what he did, this situation could have been worse. There could have been more people killed, and I tell you what, man, to think of things like this, it's pretty scary, because there are people out there that are really capable of doing this, and, there's a lot of people that don't show it until the situation actually happens, That's for sure. It is something scary to think about, but unfortunately, what more can you do? But, yeah. I'm glad it wasn't any worse than it was, but still, it could have been. And I'm thankful to the good Lord above that it wasn't. But still, it's definitely not going to change what happened. Because people still lost their life, people still got hurt, and there's multiple lives out there that were affected by this tragedy. And I'm sure this situation is a situation that sticks with a lot of people. I hear it all the time with a lot of mass shootings out there. I've heard it with, the Parkland shooting, the Uvalde shooting, the Las Vegas concert shooting. I hear about it with a lot of tragedies out there, and it's something that people never really get over. It's something that sticks with them for the rest of their life, And again, like I said a few times, it's not something I would ever wish to happen to anybody, regardless of how I feel about that person. That's for sure. But, another thing I will mention is not too long after this situation happened, I think a few months later, there was another big situation that happened where I guess a guy from Battle Creek decided to drive his truck, and he ended up plowing through a bunch of people that were on bicycles, killed quite a few and injured others. yeah. So, needless to say, the first half of 2016 was not a good year for Kalamazoo area. That's for sure. Uh, the Kalamazoo bike tragedy, that might be another situation that I touch up on, a few months down the road, but still, just thinking back on what happened, you know, in my area, it's it's scary, man. It's sad and scary to think about. I know they say that there's situations like that could happen anywhere. Um, it is sad that that is the case, but you know, I'm not here to point fingers at anybody. I'm not here to jump on any bandwagons. I'm not here to do what a lot of people do and politicize these. There's a lot of that goes on with these tragedies. People always bringing up certain things like politics. Oh, well, saying this or saying that's not going to do anything. Oh, but, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. Oh, these are going to keep happening because of this and that, blah, 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 blah. And look, to an extent, I understand what people are trying to get at, but at the same time, like, you can tell that some people out there just spend way too much time on the internet, spend way too much time politicizing or weaponizing or, criticizing people out there. And like I said, thinking a certain way or, judging or anything like that, it doesn't take back what happened. Unfortunately, whatever has happened has happened. You even have people out there that have gone to the extent of accusing these situations of being fake and accusing those who were affected or a part of these situations, false flags or staged hoaxes or anything like that. It's like, where do people even get this information? I don't really see a crap ton of people online much anymore going on and on about certain tragedies being staged hoaxes or false flags or accusing people who are a part of these tragedies, calling them crisis actors or staged hoax actors. I don't really see them doing that much anymore. I don't know if it's because YouTube and quite a few other social medias have cracked down on it. I kind of hope that is the case, but I know there for a while that was something that was going on, and it was definitely something that went on with another tragedy that definitely affected me and quite a few people that I know. But that's another situation I'll talk about later on down the road. I'm not talking about the bike, the bicycle situation. Yeah, that was pretty tragic too. But there was another situation where somebody that I went to school with ended up losing their life in New York. But that'll probably be a situation that I talk about next year, because next year will be a 10-year mark of that situation happening. But yeah, like I said multiple times, I still think about that tragedy to this day. it was definitely screwed up that it happened. And, you know, I definitely think whatever Jason Dalton had to face, whatever consequence that he got hit with, whatever sentence he got hit with, he deserves it all. And there's definitely some worse things that I think the dude deserves, but I'm not going to say it. That's really all I got to say. You know, sorry if I sounded like I was speaking gibberish, or if I sounded like I was getting my words mixed up. You know, it's a bad habit that I deal with. And for that, I must apologize for, but I'm done. You guys probably hear some cars going by. But yeah. You guys all take care now and be safe. Sorry this was a long video, but it's just something that I wanted to talk about. And like I said, I will list all the names of the victim in the description. But yeah. You guys all take care now. Be safe. God bless everybody. God bless America. And my heart still goes out to those who were affected by that tragedy that happened that day. You guys all take care and be safe.